The single most powerful word you can use to avoid work and responsibility at a modern tech company is kiddo. It's not child, it's not son, it's not daughter, it's kiddo. And if you say that you have a sick kiddo at home, your obligations will float away like Chinese lanterns. Welcome to Pray for Rain. I am your host, Jack Willis, and I come to you now from my apartment in Brooklyn, and it is fucking freezing here. I am comfortable and warm inside, but my God, my skin can't really take it anymore. And if you have my ginger-ish skin profile, there's no place where it's actually optimal for me to live. It's either too hot, it's too cold, it's too dry, it's too humid. It feels like the only place that someone with my genetic code can actually live is some bog in the British Isles. That's the only place my ancestors could have possibly been comfortable, just wet, gray, and miserable. Anyhow, I am in the comfort of my warm apartment, and I'm a part of this privileged laptop class where I can work from home. I can do my job from my couch if I choose, instead of battling somebody for a spot on the subway next to a guy that his pants on the G train. So I'm very privileged. I realize that. I'm fortunate. I don't think people really understand how fortunate some of the work from home tech class is if you've never worked in this industry. There are people that essentially contribute nothing to these companies and get paid a lot of money for it. And it's shocking to me at times. I am constantly surprised by people I encounter because I'll think, what is it you actually do around here? Or if they're on my team, I'm shocked that they can contribute so little and continue to be kept around. And I've been doing this for a while now at many different companies. And if you even can remotely speak English and you don't have the personality of a Fig Newton, you can put food in the mouths of your children for decades for a relatively trivial amount of work. You can essentially become a parasite living off of the host, as these companies tend to host a lot of people, and you just never get fired because of this nice millennial culture where everything is excused, and it allows you to work from a sauna and equinox if you want, and then you can just have your camera off perpetually. There's this woman that I worked with a long time ago, and she would constantly show up to meetings late, and she'd show up with not one but two Jimmy John's subs and not be able to answer a single question about her work. Coming in late with one sub is a bit of a faux pas, but two subs, two sandwiches. You're just signaling your intention to absolutely gorge yourself. And she would come in, she's an absolute imbecile, and she'd never be able to answer a question about her work. She'd just constantly pretend like she's confused about what people are really asking her. And you know what? It worked. She never got fired, and people rarely asked her to do anything for the team. And there have been times when I have taken advantage of this millennial tech culture for sure. I've jiggled my mouse before. That's happened. I think that anybody who says that they've never had their Wi-Fi go down at an inconvenient time is probably a liar, because we've all cashed in on this at different points. But I've been thinking about if I was really going to push this as far as I could, what it would look like if Machiavelli was going to write a playbook on working at a modern tech company. What would that sound like? And I think it would probably begin with a basic Fabian strategy of avoiding direct conflict and guerrilla style tactics of strategic retreats. And the Romans understood this, okay? Even during the Punic Wars, they knew how to bleed a tech company dry. So if they were around today, they would make a rotting husk of Oracle. I'm convinced of that. But what would you need to do on top of that? So you'd probably want to have incredibly vague goals, because vague goals are the enemy of any product and technology team. Product managers are highly attuned to this, and they want to have really specific and falsifiable claims so that they can compare your performance against that. And that's a good thing. But if you were a parasite, you would resist this at all costs. Now, you can't just go in there and make your opposition known to all of these kind of direct metrics, but you could ever so gently nudge the angle of trajectory so that it's so that the final product is miles off of what everyone intended. And if that's the case, how could you be held accountable for such a strange and unanticipated series of events and outcomes? You couldn't. And furthermore, you should probably talk about, you want to use, what words do you want to use? You want to talk about bets. You want to talk about placing bets. So this is going to play really well with the suite. Something like, I feel like we should be placing a big bet on retention and see if we can improve that, which does two things. So it shows that you're thinking strategically, and it makes the goal a bit more abstract. So you place big bets. How big? Massive. You place massive bets, because the parasite thrives in the macro. There's literally nothing too big for you. So you go up a level, 10,000 foot view, zooming out for a bit. These are all phrases that should be part of your daily vocabulary. You should be living in the fucking stratosphere with every sentence that you utter. Zoom out and up until everything is theoretical. You need to be perceived as detail-oriented, but in actuality, you're just constantly making everybody take a step back to see the bigger picture. So out, up, out, up. And what happens at one of these companies if one of your bets doesn't play off? Well, it's not really a problem, because let me tell you something. In the tech community, they actually have a secret fetish with failure. Failing fast and losing bets. It gratifies this secret sadomasochistic urge that product managers and executives have. They want to be perceived like Bezos. And they say those kinds of things. You fail fast, you fail quick, failure. So it's not a big deal. Failing is actually erotic to these organizations. So you frame your shortcomings as a failed experiment or a lost bet. You'd say something like, it didn't work out, but really glad we took the swing. And you got to frame it in terms of at-bats or swings. You need to be a buzzword merchant. And sports metaphors, and specifically baseball metaphors, are really going to take you a long way. So you'll need to move the goalpost as many times as is safe in a given quarter or a sprint. And you do it publicly, but you do it gently. You need to tell them, I was thinking about this last night, which signals that you were thinking about this in your off hours. Again, great. I was thinking about this last night. Retention might not be the correct thing to track here. It feels a bit short-sighted. Maybe we should take a swing on new subscriptions. And what this does for you, well, it allows you to blame a lack of actual output or success on changing horses mid-race, all right? How could you have been expected to produce when the priorities shifted so erratically? You couldn't have been expected to. So that's good. That's good for skirting your obligations. But what about when things go well? What about when the team does well and things trend upward? Well, in times of plenty at a tech company, a parasite's minor contributions will be automatically celebrated by a product manager in a Slack or a Microsoft Teams thread. Millennial custom demands it. So your appreciation and excitement for that post should border on sickly. Okay, it needs to be excessive, but not too much. You need to be thankful, and then you need to drown them in emojis. Okay, that will go far. That will take you a good way to stain in the minds of the team as being appreciative. Now, you're probably asking yourself, how can this be? you can just keep moving the goalpost at these companies. Won't people eventually expect you to do some work, to deliver something, some sort of results for your incredibly high salary? And that is a very shrewd question of you. Now you're thinking like a parasite. Of course, you're going to be asked to do something, and eventually you're going to have to present some work. You're going to have to provide something that you've done. So you'll produce a deck, a presentation, a report, some sort of design, and there's no way around doing some amount of labor here. But if you're an enterprising grifter, you should want as many teammates as is physically and digitally possible involved in a given project. Now, why would you want that? Why would you want more people involved in your work? Well, the opportunities for blame attribution and accountability are directly related to the group size. It's almost logarithmic. So you should be constantly trying to loop in more teams because you don't want to step on any toes. Your PM should be mildly annoyed by your sincere suggestion to give engineering some more visibility here. And you don't want to blindside anyone. Another sports metaphor, blindside. There's this team that I was on many years back, and this guy was constantly doing this. I couldn't believe it. I think we should actually get marketing involved. They were talking about doing something like this. Does engineering have engineering have visibility here? I think that strategy had planned something like this in 4 years, so maybe we loop them in here. And you could just see the light leaving the PM's eyes because he couldn't really say no to this guy's sincere request for collaboration, but he just knew it was going to fuck everything up and gum up the works. And everybody around us wasn't really saying anything because on some level they knew, yeah, sure, invite more people because that is just going to make this thing grind to a halt and it's going to make our jobs easier because it's going to be so much slower and we're not really going to have to deliver anything. So that is to say that if you've got meeting invites, the number of participants should be hidden because the meeting is so big. So when you log on to a call, it should be a kaleidoscope of NPCs, and people should think that it's an all hands when in reality it's just a sync for the next sprint or whatever. Now, what does this explosion in participation afford you? Leverage. All right? I didn't deliver on time. Fuck you. The inputs were late coming from strategy. We had to push. Well, I didn't get the designs until way later than anticipated. All right? So nothing is your fault with enough collaboration. So more collaboration, more. And a competent manager is going to resist you on this, but it's vital that you make it as bloated as possible. So this isn't a project anymore. It is a company-wide opportunity for failure. You bring in as many people as you can and let other teams fuck things up with their own strategic imperatives. All right? Let others make the mistakes and make sure that everybody knows about it. So you'll be on these massive calls it's a company-wide initiative, and then you're inevitably going to break out into your own squads. You'll have a breakout session. You'll be back into a room or a Zoom with your own team. And when this happens, you need to say something directionally negative, but not outright hostile. So you just gesture at the idea of another team being incompetent. You bait the line, you cast the hook, and you wait. So something like, that meeting wasn't really what I expected. Hold. Totally, I figured they'd want to have waited to do that before making it more public. Jackpot. All right, your teammate has just done you an immense favor. All right, you can let the cauldron boil because as somebody who's grifting on this company and being a parasite, you can never really be perceived to be critical of other teams and teammates, but you just allow other people around you to be. And it's essential. So you need to foment an environment of suspicion and hostility for your peers, but never be seen as malicious, okay? The beauty of working cross-functionally is that it allows you and other teams to pitch coalitions against one another and subtly fan the flames of resentment and blame. So it's a gift when that happens. Now, another thing, if somebody were to come in, need some more coffee. Another thing that somebody would need to really make use of or understand if they were to come into a tech company and just not really do anything but get paid for it, you need to understand time manipulation, all right? So what's a parasite's it's a parasite's best friend at these companies? It's next quarter. It's QN, as I'll call it. It is the event horizon that must never be reached. You're just endlessly pushing meetings and syncs and deadlines and projects and syncs to next week and the week after that and the week after that until finally your PM has no choice but to push the initiative to next quarter, to quarter end. Quarter end. And I'll think of some specific time mismanagement strategies here in a moment, but just understand that that is crucial. You need to manipulate time and projects to be pushed to quarter end. And most of the time you find pretty willing participants in this because at tech companies, you can work from home a lot of the time. Most companies have some policy where at least part of the time you can work from home, and some teams are actually totally work from home. And it is too enticing to not get your time back when you can immediately close your laptop after a meeting and just start fucking around on Instagram again. You're actually on your couch. You might not even be dressed, all right? And humans cannot resist that level of immediate comfort after a meeting. But how is this possible? How is somebody actually able to be this unproductive and still command six figures for it? I think about this all the time. There's probably some equation here that justifies this that someone smarter than me can figure out, but it's like the work has got to be equal to the number of collaborators divided by alignment hours and multiplied by the distance to QN, something like that. There's some equation that actually accounts for why when you add X number of people, the output just craters to a minimum. So if anybody has a good theory on that, I am all ears, but it's there. It is in the system. Now, next quarter N, can never come for you, all right? At these companies, you just want to keep pushing things further down the road, quarter N, next quarter. Again, a lot of the time, people are going to make this easy on you, so that shouldn't be a problem. But what happens if the next quarter comes? Like, what happens if you're actually expected to do something for this high salary? What would you do? Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is to understand that likability is probably your highest shield against any kind of consequences. An abundance of stored will keep you around beyond your track record of gross incompetence for a long time. And everybody knows a personality hire who just kind of pumps up the vibes on a team. And that's it. I worked with this gal I'm thinking of she just charmed your pants off. She was so likable and made everything fun. And you're just blinded by charisma. So you can do that, or you can be good looking, because you always get the benefit of the doubt when you're good looking. If your face has a certain symmetry, people will forgive and forget and praise you like you invented fire. But if you're like the rest of us, or dare I say, unattractive, then you're going to have a harder time, and you're going to need some strategies that are going to allow you to dodge accountability and not do work. What would those strategies be? I was thinking about this earlier. Like, what's actually the most effective thing that gets you out of work at these companies? It feels like it's the 3 C's. So calendars, children, and COVID. Now, at modern companies, this applies to tech, but also just applies to big corporations. You're required to post your availability on calendars now. So that's a Google Calendar. It's, God forbid, some sort of Outlook calendar, and everyone can see your calendar, your schedule. And rest assured, they will be looking. And there's nothing more dissuasive to someone asking you to do something than an absolutely packed calendar. It should look like a Jackson Pollock. All right? Your calendar should have no white space at all. There should be so many labeled events that people think it's a glitch. No white space at all. There's nothing too big or too small to be an event on your calendar. So if you've got appointments, you throw them on there. You go for a walk, you put it on there. Focus time, absolutely. At modern millennial companies, even if you put that you're doing your taxes on your calendar, people are probably going to be all right with that. If you had a tax block, yeah, there's not going to be a lot of backlash for that. And I saw this guy who had deep work, ideation phase, as a massive 3-hour block on his calendar. I think it was every day. And I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that you're in deep ideation for 3 hours. You're just sitting there with your eyes closed, thinking deeply about deep product problems. I do not believe that, sir. I don't buy that for a second. But how am I supposed to question that? How am I supposed to outwardly or publicly question someone's deep ideation time? I can't, you can't, and that's why you put it on the calendar. Now, if you are on a distributed team and you've got a large time zone difference, that's a gift, all right? Because what you want to do on your calendar is you put working hours, that is a massive block, and then you'll put your events on top of that. But then you'll also have in all caps non-working hours, and then that is another massive block as well. You need to make them think twice before you're even thinking about sending you a calendar invite. And I thought about this too, that I think it's 90% of all work is done between the hours of 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. Tuesday through Thursday. And that is shielding you from a lot of the work anyhow. That's doing a lot of the work of the grift. So if you're on a distributed team, you've got a very limited window. And it's essentially making your window for collaboration effectively 0 hours. All right. And you're meant to tag people at the end of your working day in Slack, all right? As late as is humanly possible, you tag them, and then they will reciprocate. And then that makes, again, it shrinks the effective collaboration window down to 0. So distribute a team, you post your hours, your non-working hours, and you rely on other people to wait as long as possible, just like you are. And that will, in turn, make things more likely to be pushed towards QN. Now, the next C of the 3 C's, children. Children, yes. The single most powerful word you can use to avoid work and responsibility at a modern tech company is kiddo. It's not child, it's not son, it's not daughter, it's kiddo. And if you say that you have a sick kiddo at home, your obligations will float away like Chinese lanterns. You'll be acquitted like OJ, and no one will expect anything of you, okay? You can put anything kiddo related as your status or on your calendar. You put kiddo pickup, kiddo drop off, kiddo appointments, kiddo birthday parties. All goes on there. You mean you get paid to pick up and drop off your kids every day? Yes, Grandpa. Yes, we do. There was a woman that I worked with, and she just had her kids with her all the time. They were on her lap sometimes in the middle of meetings. She had these toddlers with her, and she'd constantly have to get off a meeting or get off camera because of it. She'd be like, "Sorry guys, I got to jump off camera. Sorry, they're restless over here." You know, who could have predicted that having your actively caring for your toddlers would prevent us from being able to ask you to help us out at all? I couldn't have imagined that. And it made me think this would not be acceptable at any other time or place. If you were a stonemason 100 years ago and you just showed up to the job site with your kids, you'd be like, sorry, can't really work on the cathedral today. These guys are really rambunctious. It would not fly. It would not fly. If that guy showed up to the job site with kids, those little hands would have to be crushing granite all day, or else they would have to leave. But if you've done all of these things and you're still asked to do something, if they are just annoyingly asking you to do your job, there's one card left to play, and that is COVID, the final C. And despite being 6 years ago and 92 vaccines removed from the coronavirus pandemic, coming down with COVID at a tech company can buy you a stay of execution that even a kiddo could not. This card can only be played once a year, maybe twice, if the people at your company perceive you to be particularly weak, but proceed with caution. And if your kiddo gets COVID, well, that will buy you freedom for at least 2 fiscal quarters. So you can really cash in on that. And if you're not prepared with strategies to manage all of this, manage your day-to-day lack of input and productivity, they will pip your ass so fast, you'll wake up working for State Farm. That is a performance improvement plan, and you do not want to be on one of those. So just remember that if things ever take a turn for the worse, nothing's ever your fault. There's always something else to blame. And it's much better to appear as an earnest fool than a lazy genius. And in thinking about all this stuff, I thought, how fun would it be to be hired to find these people, to be a parasite hunter? Now, this is all shtick. Of course, nobody's really like this. Well, someone is. There's some terrible person out there who's doing all this stuff. But if you're hired as a chief parasite hunter, and on the org chart, you're listed as a chief people officer, but the grifters would know. They would know that you're digital truffle pig. You're out there just analyzing people's calendars for lies and deception. It would be so fun. And maternity leave would spike as soon as the CPH would come in. But how would I actually smoke these people out? I'd love to just send questions like, if somebody has kiddo pickup on their calendar, if you just, I'm going to hair in my mouth. If you just message them, picking up your kids again, and then immediately they get back to you on Slack on their phone because they sense a threat, and then you just go silent. You just say nothing. Your cortisol would absolutely jump in that moment. You would be terrified if some sort of consultant said that. Or if you're on a call with somebody and they were supposed to have been working like on a deck all week, and you ask them just totally unannounced, like, hey, actually, would you mind screen sharing the version history for a minute? I just wanted to check something. That would make me die inside if I knew that somebody was going to do that. It would be incredibly fun. But the reason that there is no parasite hunter is because there's a minority in every company that's actually doing all of the work. It's got to be like 30% of the people of a company or a given industry, especially tech, that are actually driving the S&P. And these people are incredible. They should be given the Presidential Medal of Honor or be allowed to board planes early. There's a woman that I'm thinking of that I worked with for a long time, and she was always in a good mood, just doing work, working hard. And I'd go over to her desk. Jesus, I can't talk today. I'd go over to her desk to talk and just shoot the shit and probably distract her. And every time I walk up, she would just be doing work. It was like some sort of simulation. She's just working away. Absolute angel. It made me feel like shit. But those people are incredible. And if you find them, you should promote them, pay them a lot of money, and let them make decisions. And it feels like this is new, at least in my estimation, having these massive companies and industries where so many people have these bullshit jobs or don't have to contribute in meaningful ways. Like, there's no way historically you could have gotten away with this. If you were a cobbler 100 years ago, and people showed up to collect from you. You couldn't be like, sorry, I need some more time on alignment. I need more time. I've had some sick kids. Eventually they'd be like, where are my fucking galoshes? You couldn't get away with that. But now things can be endlessly delayed, pretty much at every turn. We work on these products that you never actually physically touch with people that you're often just never in a room with. And you can hide endlessly from your responsibilities. And I want to be clear about this because life happens, and of course your kids are going to get sick, cars break down, care for your kids, be a parent, go to that appointment. I'm not saying that you sacrifice yourself for a SaaS company, anything like that. But what I am saying is that modern work gives us so many places to hide. There are just endless opportunities. It's never been easier to disappear. You can hide behind a status update or a bad internet connection or a calendar block. And these environments are just incredibly forgiving to that. And the temptation to take the out, to nudge a deadline, or just to coast is always there. But don't do it, because it took me a long time to internalize that my reward for successfully avoiding work was crushing anxiety and low self-esteem, an absolute cratering of my self-worth. And anytime I skirted my work for some flimsy reason or took the out, it made me feel like total shit in the long run. The initial dopamine rush of like getting out of it and not having to do the work just evaporated. And I was in this loop of constant avoidance. I need friction. We need friction to work hard and to work hard on things with people and things that we think matter. And when we don't do that, and when I don't do that, I just feel like a total slug. So take the sick day if you need it, but don't become the parasites, because it's not worth the cost to your soul. And this is a declaration, but a reminder as much to myself that, hey, you always feel better when you work hard, and those opportunities are out there, but don't take them. And then my constant amazement that all of this can happen. People can be paid so much money for not actually having a terrible amount of input. Okay, that rant is over, and I've just been thinking about that so much lately, and you're confronted with it all the time, so I'm sure that this makes somebody think of someone else they work with. But hopefully it will reaffirm the need for hard work in all of us. All right, well, that rant is over, but what else was I thinking about? Oh, yes. Okay. So I have been watching I've been rewatching the HBO show called Rome, and I think I watch it every few years because I think it's really good. But it is it's not historical fiction. I think it's pretty tightly based on the events of the fall of the Republic of Rome, not the fall of the Empire, but when Caesar came to power. And it's such a good show. It's packed with a lot of actors that you'd recognize, guys from the BBC. It's just really well done. And it makes me think, why don't they do more historical reenactment shows all the time? It's such a good format, because a lot of the structure is already taken care of for you. Like the larger beats of the story are already done, right? You just map it onto what happened in history, and then you've got to fill in between the beats. You got to make subplots, introduce interesting characters, create some tension. And in HBO's Rome, one of the cool things that you get to do is you get to make plot devices. So the protagonist, his name is, what is his name? Lucius Vorenus, which is a cool name. Lucius Vorenus, he's basically the Forrest Gump in this. Not that he's an idiot, but he takes us through the time of what it's like to be a Roman citizen, working through the legions, becoming a senator. And I always thought, man, that's so cool, because you get to have the story, the larger historical narrative, and then you get to do research on what it was like to live in that time, and then you get to have that character take us through the ages. And then there's another character who's really cool. His name is Titus Pullo. And he's played by a guy, I'm not going to remember the actor's name, but Australian dude who was supposed to take over as the lead in a new Star Wars movie or show recently, but he passed away, which is really sad. He was in The Other Guys too. Great actor, but he's in that, and he's this flawed but likable, loyal friend of Lucius Vorenus. Anyhow, they're a great tandem, and I loved the show. But you got to have interesting characters, and you got to take them through the ages. But why don't they do that for more stuff? You could do it through the Warring States period in China. You could do it the conquistadors in South America, or it could be the Iroquois Iroquois? Yeah, I think that's how you say it. The Iroquois Federation. I think that's right. In North America. That would be a cool story. And then you could have all these characters. Then you get to bring us through a new historical time period. Now we go back toward something that I rant about sometimes. I think it would be kind of cool to have an HBO series on the British in India, British Raj, which could never really be made because either side of that debate, people would be upset with it. People would call it woke if you show the oppression that happened, or they would call it, they would think that it's not historically accurate if you didn't have some just character or some nuanced take. So it couldn't really be made, but I always thought, hey, that would be a really interesting HBO series because it's a really interesting time. Another thing that you don't see a lot of, which I am mystified by, I cut out for a second, I lost my audio, but the other thing you don't see a lot of is the historical counter-narrative of a counterfactual in history. The Man in the High Castle, they did that. So what if the Nazis had actually won World War II, which is really interesting. I never really got into that show for some reason. I can't describe why. Just didn't grab me, as I cited as an interesting example. But why don't we do more of that? Because that's really interesting. And a lot of the time, the place, and the world building is taken care of for you. So then you just get to think of, what if the American Revolution failed? Or what if Napoleon had won? What if, I don't know, what if Charles the First, what if the Stuart Kings had stayed on the throne? All kinds of interesting examples of, hey, how would the world have actually turned out? Again, you get to do the same thing. You get to have interesting characters take you through that time. So it's a historical piece with interesting subplots based on actual history. They should be making a ton of those. When I am king, I will institute a policy of supreme historical fiction, historical quasi-fiction, because it's so interesting. We get to learn something, at least in theory, and it's engaging. So I just want people to be aware of that. And for all of the millions and theoretical trillions of producers that I know are big fans of my terrible podcast, I would have them just remember that for next time. Okay, I think that's all from me, but I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking about the state of work and how it's changed over the years, and how I feel good when I'm actively not trying to be a piece of shit. I'm trying to work hard on things with people. So keep that in mind, maybe, or don't. But until next time, I'm praying for rain.